Good morning, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to get to speak in front of everyone here today. This is my first Hashi Conf. I've been a Hashi Corp user for about 11 months now, so it is an awesome opportunity to get to stand in front of the mass here and kind of explain what we've done the last year and some of the things that we've learned. In saying that, I am not amazing at presenting like Armand is, and some of the great things that come along with that. So as we travel through this together and make this work. So adopting shared service this morning, if we can, I kind of want to paint a picture, and I'll be the first to tell you that my artistic ability is very minimal. You put a paintbrush in my hand, and I won't be able to compete with a kindergartner. So I'll let everyone else go about envisioning this. So if you can, think back to the environment that you currently work in. If tomorrow you started a new job and you walked into an organization that was, say, 15,000 users, and out of that 15,000 users, you maybe have about 3,000 applications. So out of those 3,000 applications, let's say the core framework for 30% of those is COBOL. We're picking languages that are older than me. So keep that in mind. So you meet your CTO, you meet a lot of the teams, they say, hey, we want to go to the cloud. We've heard some things that the cloud can offer us. We want to cut some costs, and we want to be able to rapidly evolve, make it happen. So how do you do that? How do you do that in the public sector is a hard problem to solve when the public sector is anywhere from 7 to 10 years behind most traditional companies today. So today I'm going to be talking about how we went about accomplishing that, how we went about adopting a shared services architecture to help us onboard new ideas, onboard new service teams, and change our enterprise and how we operate. So in saying that, how do you support enterprise adoption of cloud without enterprise support? So the big question here is, when you want to work in an enterprise that supports anywhere from 15 to 20,000 users, but you've got 2 guys on your team that's supposed to manage the entire cloud adoption, how do you do that? Most people would probably exit and find a new job. LinkedIn's always looking. But in saying that, how do you accomplish that? How much work do you put in that can really be replicated? So the question that we kind of formulated was DevOps for enterprises that don't DevOps. How do you do that? How do businesses and enterprise adopt the Hashi Corp suite of tools if they've never even heard of DevOps? And that's how we went about trying to solve our current problems. So when we sat down with a lot of industry partners, we said, hey, this is a lot of the problems that we're having. These are the areas that we want to concentrate in. What's the best way to go about this? We have minimal skill sets. We have a very quick time for adoption that we need to execute in, but at the same point, we're brand new to this space, so how do we go about accomplishing that? So we kind of looked at how industry practices at scale, and it really came up with shared services. So why did my enterprise need shared services? And it really came down to 3 points, and that is adoption, governance, and the size and skill of the workforce that we had. As I was coming into the position, we had no cloud experience whatsoever. I was handed the job coming from a data center and networking background and expected to integrate all of the great things that you get with cloud with no skill force behind that, and we needed it up and going quickly. The public sector faces a little bit different of a challenge because we not only operate in your normal cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and GCP in the commercial regions, but we also have other regions inside of that are what we would consider air-gapped. They're disconnected from the internet. So you have a different set of problems that you have to be able to address. And that laid the foundation of work that I do one time gets replicated 4 times. So when I have an environment that is working in commercial Amazon or commercial Azure, I need to be able to have clear, concise workloads that work in commercial AWS, commercial Azure, but I can also put in the secret regions of AWS. So with a small workforce of less than 6 people, how can we write code, how can we deploy applications, and how can we support onboarding new users in the most efficient way? So the shared services model was a model that we adopted, but it has matured over this last year. So I think everyone at some point has heard of what shared services are. Their idea of it's a common core set of technologies, usually offered by IT departments, that get used by multiple different teams that are commonly executed to save money. You're not replicating the same thing over and over again. So this is how most non-agile IT departments work. And I think you could find this even today across a lot of businesses. They still execute on this model where a service team or an end user needs to be able to launch a new application, or they need some type of service exception, so they put in a ticket. That ticket then will get routed through a chain. For us, it would go to the cyber department instantly. And then if the cyber team said, hey, this is a valid request, we're okay with it, it'd go to operations. And from operations, it would go straight into, hey, what team is handling this? Is this going to be our systems team, our networking team? And then from there, we would boot up a VM like anyone else would. We'd put an application on it. It would have to have firewall exceptions. At no point in this do you even see development testing. This is how a lot of the public sector has operated for the last 5 to 7 years in how we do software deployment and infrastructure deployment. There's no development and testing environment of that. So how do we change that? How does the Hashi Corp suite of tools enable me as a cloud service provider to have a core set of services that comply to adoption, governance, and meet the skill set that we have? So the shared services concept, let's take a drink real quick. So the shared services concept, the idea that most people are aware of is it starts with some type of source control management. The core of most shared services fit in one of these brackets. So whether that's source control management, that's infrastructure provisioning, secrets management, networking, and platform orchestration or runtime environments. This shared services concept is usually managed by larger teams. So you have your networking team, you have your cyber team, your platform teams, a lot of different teams. In our case, we didn't have any of these. We had about 3 people that were familiar with the cloud concepts, that were familiar with writing code, and were familiar with the overall ideology on how you institute this. So if you take this and you transpose over the Hashi Corp suite of tools, you get the common tools that all of us know and love. Everything starting from source control, but standing up to our provisioning. Terraform and Packer. Vault for taking care of our security and secrets management, networking with console, and then our runtime environments with Nomad and Kubernetes. The issue with this is an architecture that most everyone in the room understands. Out of a group of 1,000 administrators and developers that we worked with, there was maybe a handful of people that had heard of these tools. So it kind of sets a precedence. How do you take a enterprise that's never heard of DevOps, give them the Hashi Corp suite of tools that are at the very forefront of how we do business in the DevOps industry? How do you do that? And how do you integrate that in? How do we begin to institute the software where we can get very quick iterations, but also enable our service teams to be able to expand and grow? So in saying that, today I'm really going to be talking about the shared services in depth around 2 core technologies and 2 core products at Hashi Corp. That being Terraform Enterprise and Vault Enterprise. Now this same strategy can be applied with the open source versions of these tools. We are looking at it to service a group of, like I said, 15 to 20,000 users. So open source for us necessarily wasn't an option at scale with the workforce that we had. We didn't have the developers that could bolt on some scaffolding. So out of the gate, we needed something that would help us adopt quickly, would give us the governance that the public sector requires, and also shorten the skill gap that was needed for our team to kind of execute on this one. So starting off, when we talk about infrastructure provisioning, when I was told, hey, let's go to the cloud, there's really very little context behind that. We had brought in a new CTO. We had restructured our leadership a little bit to be able to inherently move faster in software development. But we weren't prepared for the things that come along with developing in cloud infrastructures that use native cloud tooling. So when we went to institute this architecture, we were net new in the cloud. We started a lot of the teams that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Our cyber team, our networking team, our cloud governance team, our CI/CD team, and our platform team, they all started on the same exact day. Now, everyone out here has probably been in the industry for a little bit to tell you, hey, that's really, you don't do business that way. And it's hard to set in principles in technology. So where do we make up time? Where do we get that efficiency? So a lot of things kept coming back to we're redoing work. We've talked to a lot of industry partners, and a lot of the things that we heard was, hey, any place that you can have efficiencies that you can use multiple times, that should be the first thing that you go after. So in how we adopted shared services and how we went about that with Hashi Corp suite of tools, it really started around kind of the first point here, which was identifying kind of the bare bones services that we needed to be able to adopt our movement into the cloud. We needed to identify services, all the things that were happening in a parallel effort. What did we need to do as a service provider to enact and support service teams that, at the end of the day, they support the true end user? So we had to identify those core services, and everything kept coming back to us. It all stemmed from Terraform. Outside of terraforming a Amazon EC2 box, to, hey, how do we go about legitimately standing up accounts? This is a net new environment. We adopted the AWS landing page concept where you have multiple accounts for multiple services. So we go from one account on a Monday to 1,000 accounts a month later, trying to kind of adopt a mentality that grows. How do you do that with the least amount of work? So with Terraform, we figured out very early the use of being able to have a structured process for that service. So we needed to understand what the service was going to provide internally to us as a team, and then we could help take that exact service and turn it around and focus it for our users. And a lot of the things that you will see, and I kind of talk about, is it's the same Hashi Corp mentality that the tools were designed to answer a problem internally, and then they were adopted and supported by the community after that. And that was the same approach that we took out of the gate with Terraform. We needed Terraform to build the constructs of a cloud environment. Before we could bring in any service team, any developer, any application, we needed to be able to put good governance in place. We needed to have IAM policies, all the things for a secure cloud environment. So Terraform, what's different about enacting Terraform Enterprise in a shared services concept compared to Terraform Open Source? Why did we truly pick Terraform Enterprise over Terraform Open Source? And it really came down to two major areas. One of the three things I talked about that I needed was governance. And with Hashi Corp suite of tools, when you look at the enterprise versions of Sentinel, it is the easiest way for me to be able to the work that I have to put into deploying infrastructure, securing infrastructure. I can also put governance on top of that. So the time that I invest in a tool pays off in multiple areas. Most teams will openly admit that cybersecurity is usually the hardest team to work with. They usually never walk into a meeting with cybersecurity and they will say yes to everything. It's usually hard-nosed, and you have to prove why this works. And it's especially that way in the public sector. How do we go about allowing developers and service teams to deploy infrastructure and do all this in a commercial cloud that's not protected? how do you do that? How do I sell that to my cybersecurity team? And that started with Sentinel. So Sentinel was our number one choice on why we were going with the enterprise suite of tools out of the gate. It allows us to put governance in place of resources and how we execute in environments with very small teams. In saying that, we needed our workforce to be able to execute in a cloud environment where no one knows Terraform. Now, we could have teams, we could have developers that we bring in that could learn Terraform on the side, but that's usually, for people that's been practicing and writing Terraform code for a few years now, honestly, that's a little scary, bringing new teams in, giving them Terraform that they don't know how to use Terraform, and then setting them free in the cloud. That's how you go to $1 million really quick in your spend budget. So how do we enact good governance, good security controls, and good budget practice with that? So the second part of us picking Terraform Enterprise was the need to tie it into core services. I needed to have the ability to tie it into my ticketing system like ServiceNow. I needed the ability to have single sign-on and use current IDAM providers that we have and really have that core integration without a ton of development for my team. The second part of that is private modules. If my entire workforce doesn't know the difference in AWS between a T2 Micro and a M5 8XL, and they deploy 11 of them, it becomes a problem. So with private Terraform modules, we were given the ability to, hey, we can take the cloud experts that we have, the people that know Terraform, and we can provide a one-stop shop, self-service. You don't have to know Terraform to use Terraform ability. And when you're in the public sector, that is, your adoption rate and trying to bring new technologies in a lot of times is very hard. So how do you bring that to your workforce, enable them and tell them, hey, you don't have to learn anything new. You need to put the name of the application, you need to put what team you're on, and is this going to be a production app or not? And that allowed us to really generate Terraform modules that were purpose-driven, that could be written by people that understood how to use Terraform and understood how to deploy inside of the cloud. So that kind of goes to the point 3 on here, prioritize modules for internal teams. So our team, the cloud service provider team, we sat down internally and said, hey, we're getting ready to deploy Terraform, Vault, and all these things in a production environment. What is the number one thing that's going to replicate every time? Are we going to use EC2 the most? Are we putting this in EKS or AKS? What is our most common used module that we're going to go? And let's stand that up. Let's figure out where we're going to gain from the beginning, where we can gain efficiency that other teams will be able to use. And we develop that internally. So to deploy Terraform Enterprise in a cloud environment that can't necessarily always use a SaaS offering, we had to go with private Terraform Enterprise. So that meant that we had to deploy and manage Terraform Enterprise, but we had to do it not only from a commercial perspective, but in other security domains. So we had to Terraform private Terraform. So then we really looked back again on, hey, what modules can we currently use that's available outside that we can tailor to what we need to do, write it one time, and figure out where it fits in our module, and then we can reuse it multiple times. So, and then the fourth point on that was kind of executing and publishing this. So we wanted to work out a lot of the kinks internally as our team before we offered this service to any other service team. The whole point of shared services in our environment is, hey, how do we provide services and tools to teams that don't understand this environment but can comply to our policy and our vision? So the tool that I haven't talked much about yet is Vault. And in all honesty, Vault has been a pivotal point in how we've deployed some of our architecture, but it's also been a point on how we've looked at our current infrastructure. A lot of things I've talked about is net new deploying the cloud, but I haven't talked about my current everyday workload that's running in an on-prem data center in VMware that is not automated. My organization, we took an application discovery and we looked and said, how many apps today could even be containerized. And out of a number, we were close out of 5,000 apps, about 25 of them could go to containers today. So that's a very large spread in applications. So then we looked at the same thing. How much infrastructure do we have now that we currently using that isn't being utilized correctly? And that kind of drove how we continued to kind of adopt the tool. So when we brought in Vault, we looked at where do we have in our current infrastructure that uses that's something that's Vault-like, that manages secrets, that takes care of SSH keys, that gives us the ability to generate dynamic at-request tokens. And we kind of discovered that there wasn't an application that really existed for that. But that also meant that there wasn't anything that required that internally in our on-premise environment. So how did we stand up a model that allowed us to provide this service and also explain how we were going to use this and integrate it in new applications? So kind of moving on to the next point is, so our shared services adoption, everything that we started out with was net new. It was either deploying in AWS, Azure, GCP, and this gave us the ability, after we started standing up core services, we could really control net new projects. So it could go through a proper production environment. It could go through a development. We could test code out. We could really deploy with our two strong tools of Terraform Enterprise and Vault Enterprise with net new applications that weren't really affecting users. We didn't have to migrate any services over. These were all net new additions to our enterprise. And if that was the case, that would be an easy transition. But most public sector entities or most enterprises that's not even heard of DevOps, that's not how they're going to operate. So we had to look at how do we bring in the current workloads that we have. What do we focus on after we get a shared services model that stands up, that provides infrastructure provisioning at request from a developer or a service team, secrets management. Once we stand that up, how do we provide that internally to our teams that are starting to hear about cloud and they want to incorporate their application to their service, but it might not be ready to move to the cloud yet. How do we offer that? So then everything we've kind of looked at is the service teams on the right-hand side of the screen, they provide the core infrastructure there, but at the end of the day, it's only unidirectional. They're only looking at the cloud. They're not having to look at anything. They're not having to fix problems behind them. When you add in the second side and you kind of change the model up and you go to where you're supporting service teams that have applications that's deployed on-prem, and also net new applications that are getting deployed inside of the cloud, how do you service that? What is the best way to go about that? And that was our hardest problem to solve, and we're still currently working on that. How do we take Terraform, that a lot of the community is built around AWS, Azure, and GCP, and how do we really strengthen that around VMware? How do we take meetings and bring teams in and say, hey, we want you to adopt a newer model. We want to bring you into a production pipeline that works for you. How do we take you from an environment where you left-click and build a VM and you hope it works with the service to you deploying through provisioned infrastructure that is secure, that's been tested, that you know your application or your service is going to execute as advertised. So one of the large things that we've come to is the importance of having a stack that you understand inside and out was critical. So Terraform and Vault, when we looked internally at VMware and how we were going to run on our applications and bring those in, the number one thing we did was we went back to, hey, what are the core services that are running right now that teams currently do on a day-to-day basis? If we can change their lives and their workflows on a day-to-day, we will gain advocates for our model, and we'll adopt more people in. I can apply more governance to my entire enterprise if I get more people on our shared services platform. And that has been a key point this year, is how do we do that? How does any organization go about that? And kind of our first answer is get wins where you can get them. If you have a workforce that the average age of any of your developers or any of your system admin is around 58 to 62, you figure out what makes their life easier so they can watch ESPN. And then you backtrack from there. So we really have stuck around the infrastructure provisioning point because that is the easiest way to be relevant to the public sector. The public sector, a lot of the times, a lot of the issues that you see isn't really up the stack, isn't at the application or the runtime environment. That is an issue, but a lot of the root cause issues, they're at the infrastructure level. They can't provision, they can't test, they can't stand up a production environment and test because their development environment looks nothing like their production environment. So how do we replicate that on an internal on-premises private cloud and give developers and service teams that opportunity? And it always comes back to, we will develop it internal to the stack, deploy it in the cloud, give them a chance to figure out their application and how that application works. But we don't require them to really know Vault, to know Terraform. They're really figuring out the upper level problems of their applications now. We try to extract as much detail as we can from them and give them the ability to really get into the environment, figure out what their applications do or how that service team provides service to end users. And then as they grow and understand in that environment, then we start peeling back a little bit of the curtains, letting them design custom modules. Everything is kind of, we use the mentality of everything's got training wheels. If you haven't been deploying in the environment, if this is your first time, we're not letting the training wheels off. You're going to show us that you can work in this environment and you know what you're doing before we're willing to let you publish custom modules and kind of execute at that. So from a pure governance perspective, that helps our team out tremendously. And one of the strong points is being able to leverage the Hashi stack. The more that you use enterprise service tooling, it allows you to really ingrain Sentinel policies that's not wrote by my team. I get to get cyber in the equation very early, drive policy as code for a lot of the services that we're going. I can set a service team down with someone on my team that knows Terraform, that knows Vault, and I can set them down with cybersecurity, and they come up with a policy that's not written on a piece of paper and published to a wall that someone just walks by. It's an actual policy that is followed and executed. So I can ensure that my adoption to the cloud and my adoption to using these tooling sets on premises is adopted correctly, safely, but at the end of the day provides the service teams and the users the environment that they're hoping for. So in saying that, I got to build my slide deck about an hour and a half ago. So our legal team kind of scrubbed it this morning. So that's always great as a presenter when you have to build an entire PowerPoint deck about an hour and a half before your presentation. So a lot of the things today is how do you take this shared services adoption and this model for an organization that doesn't know DevOps? And the answer is the model itself. If you take the small workforce that you have that knows Terraform, that knows Vault, that understands cloud architecture, and you start from a very solid base to say, hey, we're going to pick our common workloads, our common environments, our common daily executed tasks. We build that internally for our team. We start integrating that into our actual entire enterprise, and then slowly we feed that to customers. We build the advocates, and we also meet our goals of transitioning to a cloud environment, but also at the same time growing with scale and being able to have users that understand what is going on. It's a self-service mentality, which is really hard for a public sector environment that is really using ITIL fundamentals. And with shared services, you really get the option. Once you really start integrating your services, you tie these services in with ServiceNow and any other current big provider that you have inside of your IT department. You get to slowly add those in. So hey, whenever you bring in a new team, figure out where they fit at in your stack. What can you Terraform for that team? What can you open up in Vault to allow that team to offer a service to your greater enterprise in a self-service fashion? If we can enable teams, service teams and service providers, end users and developers, a self-shop, safe, secure environment, we make our jobs easier, and at the same time, we have a high customer satisfaction. So in saying that, I'm coming up at 5 minutes now, so thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to speak to everyone today. If anyone has any questions or would just like to talk, I'd be happy to talk about the technical details behind this. This was really meant to be an introductory PowerPoint and presentation on, hey, how do you adopt this model for an enterprise that doesn't understand DevOps? So again, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great conference.